Hello and welcome to the TIFO Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine, and today I'm delighted to be joined by John Mackenzie.
Hello, Joe.
All right, how's it going?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm live. I'm live.
I'm also live.
Yes, that's true. You are also live. And thirdly, live is producer Nathan Clark.
Hello.
All right, how's it going?
Not bad.
You're at the table today, aren't you, in lieu of a real guest?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Thank you for making that clear.
For listeners, for people watching this on YouTube later, or indeed for people who've joined us live, because as I repeat, we are live streaming, when Nathan does talk, we'll try to keep it to a minimum, but please don't judge the quality of what he says as though he is a real guest, because today he's not. He's been a real guest in the past, and the bar has been higher on those shows, but today the bar is very, very low. Anyway, what are we talking about? Now, usually when we do a live stream, it's after a huge and important game of football. That's not the case today, which is a comment that will upset the fans of both Newcastle and West Ham, although it's simultaneously true. How about that? We're going to talk a little bit about relegation stuff on the next episode earlier in this week. Also, Spurs have got Chelsea to come.
That's right.
Chelsea to come on Tuesday night, so we'll save relegation. Also, Arsenal play on Monday night, so we don't have that to talk about either. Instead, we have three pretty exciting topics to discuss today. The first is we're going to talk about Mohamed Salah's, how else to put this, remarkable statement from yesterday that he posted on his social media. And what the consequences for that could be, what perhaps Mo Salah means with that post. We're going to talk about that. Next, we're going to talk about the FA Cup final between Chelsea and Manchester City. John's got some interesting tactical thoughts about that. We were, as I'd said, going to discuss Newcastle West Ham. That's kind of chalked off a little. And instead, we're going to talk about, it's our first opportunity actually to discuss how Man United appear likely to hand Michael Carrick a 2-year deal to make that permanent. So something people probably expected anyway. But who knows? Okay, did I miss anything, John?
No, nothing. You got everything.
I'm supposed to ask producer Nathan that. Did I miss anything?
Perfect.
There's going to be a rondo, though, as well, isn't there? Not a rondo.
No, not a rondo.
What is there?
What's like a rondo but not quite?
A passing drill.
A croissant?
Yeah, a generic passing drill.
Okay.
Legally distinct passing drill.
Well, he said what's like a rondo but not a rondo. You know, a croissant in some ways. Both things exist in my reality. One is not the other thing. Tick both boxes there, you know.
That's quite a broad set of criteria you're operating with there.
That is the feedback I got to my university dissertation,
Yeah.
but still passed. So what are you going to do? They can't take it away from me now. Can they?
They can't.
No, they
It's
can't.
yours now.
When you get that, you get it for life, right?
That's right.
There we go. How about that? Okay, well, after this bit of music, we will start talking again. Okay. Ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. All right, let's begin by discussing Mohamed Salah's incredible statement.
Mohamed Salah 1-0 Liverpool.
That's right. His incredible statement from yesterday, which I think it became sort of social media viewing throughout the evening, mostly to see how many Liverpool players would like the comments or tweets or Insta posts, whatever they were, which I think by the end of the evening, or certainly by the end of the weekend, seemed to be a huge number of them. In fact, I think it's easier to name the players that haven't engaged with it than it is to name those who have. I'm going to read some of the statement.
Can you read this in the style of Rutger Hauer in Blade Runner? Because there's a real Rutger Hauer quality to the first few lines.
You want me to read Tears and Rain?
Yeah, but read the first line and tell me that isn't pure Rutger.
I have witnessed this club go from doubters to believers. Is that right? I'm not on the
good.
accent, but yeah, I've got the dramatization is there, right? I won't do the whole thing in that, but thank you, I appreciate that. Anyway, I was gonna miss that bit. It just begins with Mo Salah saying, you know, it took hard work.
He's seen things that you people wouldn't imagine.
Yeah, I've seen gunships off the surface of Jupiter.
Yeah.
I've seen
something about the Brandenburg Gate.
Something about that. Something about
all of
crying
these
in the
moments
rain.
will be lost in time.
Nothing makes me prouder than those things, said Mo Salah. Anyway, here's the key bit of the statement that I think people found most explosive. He said, "Us crumbling to yet another defeat this season was very painful and not what our fans deserve. I want to see Liverpool go back to being the heavy metal attacking team that opponents fear and back to being a team that wins trophies. That is the football I know how to play, and that is the identity that needs to be recovered and kept for good. It cannot be negotiable, and everyone that joins this club should adapt to it." and then he goes on to talk about, winning some games is not good enough, and he's always done everything he can. He loves the club, and it's very important to his family. All of the kind of nice stuff that wouldn't have caused any issues. It's a bit shocking. I mean, John, I think we've seen from the outspoken parts of Arne Slot and Mo Salah's relationship that we can infer that maybe they don't have like the best relationship. They seem to have had some difficulties working together over time. And of course, this coming weekend or next weekend will be Mo Salah's final game at Liverpool. It's a home game, so I think it will be a somewhat awkward affair after this, because presumably, unless something happens this week, which I highly doubt that it will, Arne Slot's going to be the manager, and also is presumably the only way to interpret this, I think, is that the statement is at least in some way directed at him, and Mo Salah is also going to be getting a big send off from fans at Liverpool who adore him as a player. What do you make of this? I mean, do you want to go through it and pick out any
There's
of the
so
bits
much
you
stuff,
like?
isn't there, to go on here. One of the things that stands out to me is this is the football that I know how to play, and he's saying this the season after he's probably had his best season in professional football under the manager that he is currently firing shots at.
Yes,
potentially. So yeah, do we see that? Do we see that then as the players saying, actually, last season we were playing holdover Jurgen Klopp football, and as time has gone by, it's got less and less Jurgen Kloppy.
I guess maybe. I mean, I suppose that the biggest changing point there would have been the summer where they brought quite a lot of new players in, and we talked last season about the idea that Arne Slot actually did quite a good job of managing a transition between what was successful Jurgen Klopp football and the squad and the style of play, although it was largely just playing to Salah's favour, and moving towards a closer to a style that Slot, I guess, prefers, but also maybe considered necessary in what is a changing landscape. I mean, the thing I found so interesting about this statement is that he, or speculating whoever wrote this for him, has used the term heavy metal football, which I would say two things about. One, I don't think we've described Klopp's football as heavy metal football for about 4 years. I really don't think that's happened for a long time. Klopp evolved a lot when he was a manager of Liverpool, so I'm not certain what exactly he means by that.
The quote of heavy metal football comes from 2016.
Right.
And that's a Jurgen Klopp quote talking about the differences between him and Arsene Wenger.
Yeah.
The quote is, he likes having the ball, he being Wenger, likes having the ball, playing football, passes. It's like an orchestra, but it's a silent song. But I like heavy metal more. I always want it loud. So even just calling it heavy metal football, I suppose, is sort of being a bit flamboyant with what he actually said.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the conversation about heavy metal football and even just Jurgen Klopp's career in the Premier League is a really interesting one, because, like you say, we stopped using that term really quite early on. I think in part because it's very much a sort of online outlets like buzz phrase to be like, we're talking about Jurgen Klopp, right? It's sort of a hat tip to like, heavy metal football, Jurgen Klopp.
Well, it was kind of a humorous analogy when he made it, right?
Yeah, right. And
I don't think it was his official name for his type of football.
Yeah, and there's an interesting conversation to be had about who wrote Salah's statement, right? Because I'm convinced that he wouldn't use that phrase potentially. So he's probably said to someone, I miss Jurgen Klopp's football. I want you to write a statement that indicates that I miss it, and they've gone for this heavy metal football. But yeah, as we were saying, the timeline in which Jurgen Klopp goes through the Premier League, I think is really interesting because I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I've got a whole chapter on Jurgen Klopp in my book that's coming out.
He's always talking about his book, Nathan.
People can pre-order right now. It's out on August the 20th.
Even when we're just playing video games in the evening and there's no audience,
and
he's still talking about his book.
You can order it from any good outlet. In fact, if you want the website, it's geni.us
Oh my goodness.
/ The Spectre of Pep, which is the title of the book. Anyway, chapter
Harry Potter and the Spectre of Pep.
Yeah.
Chapter 5 is all about Jurgen Klopp, and I think I set that chapter up as the one of the big things that we get from Pep Guardiola is he implements control on games. He implements control in games using possession football. And then you get Jurgen Klopp coming in, who seems to be doing the opposite, right? He wants to seemingly destabilise. He wants to create chaos. There's a famous quote from him in when he's at Borussia Dortmund, where he says, if we try and play Bayern Munich in this sort of control environment, they're going to beat us because they've got the players who thrive in that kind of environment. So what we've got to try and do is pull them down to our level by introducing this chaos into the game. And that's very much what we see from Klopp when he arrives in the Premier League. He is going to play this heavy metal football, and obviously 2016 is right at the beginning of his time in the Premier League. But I think what we see through time is that, it's very tempting to kind of view that period where Klopp and Guardiola are sort of vying against one another at the top of the Premier League and be like, well, it was the triumph of control, right? It was Guardiola basically won all of everything that they competed for together, apart from one season, and people would point to COVID and all the arguments. So it's very easy to say that control wins out. I think what we get in that period is very much close. The only coach who ever really comes close to actually stopping Guardiola causing a problem. And I think now the tactical environment we live in at the moment, where control has been rotated to a considerable amount, and Pep's playing captain to a certain extent. I think you can make the argument that Klopp is, one of the earliest catalysts for that movement towards reducing the amount of control that Guardiola was able to produce. So, yeah, I think once you read that history through, it's kind of easy to I think set it up as too easy a distinction between, on the one hand, Klopp with chaos, and on the other hand, Guardiola with control. But I think through that time, it's very clear that both coaches move closer together. They actually, the gap between them narrows considerably, and I think Guardiola introduces elements of chaos, more elements of chaos into his game than were there before. And I think Klopp certainly reduces the amount of chaos in his and introduces levels of control. And actually you can see that in various metrics if you want to go through and look at the amount of possession that Liverpool have. And they're putting up, 60% possession under Klopp for most of the time. The really interesting thing to compare them on, though, is changes of possessions. So obviously, with Guardiola trying to control games, they want to have as little possession change as possible. So they're going to try and keep the ball for as long as possible because they don't want to risk losing the ball and then having to win it back, because his teams are going to struggle in those sorts of environments. So it's very much control the ball and then win the ball back as soon as possible once you lose it. Whereas with Klopp, you actually see that number staying really high, the possession control changes, because his teams are so confident without the ball that they're like, it's fine for us to be a little bit more risky, to put the ball into more risky areas, because we know we can counter press and win the ball back as well. So yeah, I think the 2 points that I'm making here is, on the one hand, yes, with Klopp you do have that chaos. He does introduce chaos at the elite level in the Premier League, but at the same time, I think we do see through time his chaos being domesticated to a certain extent and becoming a little bit more controlled as time goes by. But I don't think he ever loses it. He always retains that level of chaos, and it's interesting to then read what Salah's saying in the light of that, because the famous quote from Arne Slot when he comes in at Liverpool is, he says, this is what he emphasizes the similarities between him and Klopp, and says, we're not that different. We both want to be aggressive. We both want to play direct attacking football. But for me, I want to be a little bit more controlled. I don't want to go forward immediately. I want to pick and choose the times that we go forward. And I think it's very clear then that even that difference is being highlighted by Salah, saying, no, even the Slot route has gone too far towards control. We want to go back to a bit more of a direct, chaotic approach. So yeah, I think it's a really fascinating statement to come out with. And on the one hand, you kind of feel as though, well, can you go back to that period? I mean, we're not going to go back to early Klopp at Liverpool, but the later Klopp,
does it not sort of suit what the Premier League has become in some ways?
And I think that's definitely true. And the big question that we're going to have about all of the managers we're going to talk about in the next few weeks, we're going to talk about Michael Carrick, who his team are playing quite direct football. He changes everything, because we've talked about this a little bit before, but the idea is with an interim job, your job is to sort of tide things over until the end of the season, and obviously he's done a very good job of tiding things over to the season, to the end of the season. But I think it gives you a little bit of breathing space to be able to do various things, right? If things aren't going, you can experiment with your tactical approach, your lineups, the way that you deal with things in a way where, yes, okay, if you want to keep the job on, there's something riding on it for you. But at the same time, if it goes wrong, there's that understanding, well, you're put into a difficult situation.
Sure.
This is your first senior position really in the Premier League, give or take the coaching that he was doing there under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer.
So there's zero pressure.
Yeah, so there's less pressure. And also the context of this season for Manchester United is worth mentioning as well, that they played 40 games this season. That's the 38 Premier League games and then one domestic game. Domestic cup competition each. They only played one game and got immediately knocked out. So that is important context, right? Because and even if they'd have gone a little bit deeper in the cups, they knew they had no European competition. So that's a minimum of 8 games in the current structure of European competitions that they knew were going to be fewer. And the club will have optimised for that, right? They will have made decisions where they're like, we don't have Europe. This gives us certain advantages. We can approach this season in a very different way. Now, when you get to the end, before I get to why that makes it, we'll do that in the next section, won't we? What's different about next season?
Yeah.
So there's
Look at that. He stopped himself.
Yes,
he doesn't normally stop himself. Well
I've stopped myself. But what I will say is so it's very hard when in the context of an interim season, it's very hard to actually make any kind of judgment about what a coach has done because of all of the context that we've talked about actually changes things. If he'd been a full head coach, he might not have made some of the tactical decisions that he'd made, etc. If it hadn't been for the fact they weren't in Europe, he might not have approached things in quite the same way. It would have been probably a tougher season for them, especially taking into account things like squad depth, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. Mm-hmm. But what I will say is that he has been brilliant when it comes to the soft skills, the man management stuff. The problem with Manchester United perennially has been it ends up being a bit of a shit show, and those things kind of pull seasons down. Everyone seems happy that he's there. He seems easy to get on with. Yeah. He has that ability to talk about the club in a way which shows that he is. I mean, he's been there. He understands what the club's mentality and ethos is. All of that stuff.
Very calm. As
well.
Yeah,
exactly. And that stuff counts, right? That regardless of what the rest of the context is, he's shown that he can do the soft skill stuff to an extent that I think it's worth then at least giving him the chance to show what he can do as a senior manager or as a full manager next season. Or I should say head coach he will be, won't it? Rather than manager.
I don't know exactly what
I suspect it will be head coach.
Probably will be head coach, right? There was a really good question from Siddharth in the chat, which was, and maybe we can weave this into the question I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
Siddharth's question was, how is this different from Solskjaer? Which I think is a key one, because the main criticism of this could be, or probably will be, although I haven't read much of it, that we've been here before. This didn't go well last time. So keep that in your mind.
Yeah.
And the next part of it is also, although producer Nathan's already greyed it out, despite the fact that we haven't actually asked it yet, producer Nathan.
He just wants it to be over.
He wants this section to be over.
He's trying to trick us through.
Is how we should view this then through the lens of next season. You stopped yourself from saying that in order for me to ask you the question. Yeah. Thank you. But I think one of the key points here is that, as you say, they played 40 games this season, and of which Michael Carrick managed less than 20, I assume, but maybe slightly more than 20. When did Amorim get fired? Was it November?
It was quite late.
No,
I don't think Carrick's had more than 20.
No, okay. Then I genuinely can't remember when that was. I'm actually. That's one of those things where you think your brain should work, and then you're slightly concerned.
Those 5 games where they could have won, the 5th one against West Ham, right, and they drew. And then there's probably been 10 games since then.
Anyway,
so I reckon 15.
It doesn't matter. How do we view that through the lens of next season, where they will play more than 40 games?
Yeah,
very much more than 40 games, I would say. And why is it different from Solskjaer?
So I think the important thing to get around our heads around here is that next season Manchester United will have to do things differently. And they will have had to do something different if they'd have got a different head coach in the summer. But they're going to have
16 games. They say 16 games.
Oh, there you go. That was one off. Yeah.
Pretty close.
They're going to have to do things differently next summer. But next season. Whoever comes in this summer, that includes Carrick, right? So Carrick is going to have to do something different next season than what he's done this season for various numbers, right? We've talked about they're going to have European football, so that's already 8 more games than they're going to have. So they're already at 48. Could well be more if they go deep in Europe, if they go deeper in the domestic cups. That changes everything, right? Because the squad depth has been massively influential this season because they haven't needed to have it, right? They're often playing every week. Sometimes they had a break in the middle of the season of like 3 weeks at one point.
And it's a little dodgy when they start to use their depth. You know, the main people I think of when I think of Man United's depth are Xerxes, who I actually quite like. I think he's a pretty good link-up player, but he's probably seemingly not of the quality that they want. And then also Manuel Ugarte, who just seems to have been has not worked out.
Yeah, and so what will happen this summer is I think they'll probably bring in like 3 big-ish names. They'll bring in a big number 6. They'll spend a lot of money on
people with long names or people with recognisable
names,
right.
Yeah. And then they'll probably strengthen another couple of positions.
Who should they buy, John? Elliot Anderson?
Sure, if that's who you want.
Yeah?
Yeah, go for that.
What about... Nope, I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, Elliot Anderson is the only person that you know.
You said earlier, though, that like you think they'll buy a central midfielder. That's where they'll spend the money, or where they should spend the money. And then...
To replace Casemiro.
Yeah.
And then there'll be other... I think there'll be other areas where they'll probably strengthen. I've not really given it a huge amount of thought. The point I'm making is... They're going to need way more depth, right? They're not going to be able to fix their depth this summer. So going into a season where they're going to have to play more games is necessarily going to be harder for them to do with the squad they currently have, even if they bring in 3-4 other new players, right?
Yeah.
So already you've got those kind of things that are going to happen. And then on top of that, right, the lack of squad depth means, and the rise in games means that they're going to have more recovery. The players are probably more likely to get injured next season. They've not had a huge amount of injuries in particularly goal scoring positions this season. They have had AFCON, which will be there this season as well. Is that right? Maybe that's not actually right. I don't know if there's an AFCON. Is there an AFCON
I don't know if there's one coming
this
season. I was just going to say that I think January was difficult for their club, wasn't it?
Sure. And I think there's even an argument that they may have
Producer Nathan's shaking his head.
No AFCON.
AFCON 2028.
Okay,
that's
I was wrong.
Some time away.
But there's a World Cup, so a lot of the players will be playing through that, and again, that will influence recovery time. But even I think the tactical approach will have to change, right? Because I think this season, and this was something that started with Amorim, right? Is they brought in those forwards who are good goal scorers, particularly good goal scorers in transition moments, and they've been able to play really aggressive transition football. Next season, there's a number of reasons why that might not go so well, right? They'll probably have teams accepting, well, if they're really good in transition, we're not going to allow the conditions of transition football to emerge. But also, if you're playing football twice a week or 3 match days in a week, right? So, weekend, midweek, weekend. There's going to be way more. It's going to be way harder for you to run if you have a thin squad.
Yeah.
Your preferred players on that kind of schedule, right? So with all of those things in mind, something is going to have to give. It will probably mean that they have to try and control games with the ball in certain stages. They're going to want to try and do that eventually anyway, probably. But again, you don't have the players to be able to do that. So what do? You don't have the depth. There's going to be issues that emerge.
Will you engage in a quick fire round with me?
Yes.
Because we've been live for over an hour now.
Oh, really?
Did you know that? Yeah. Okay. Quick fire question number 1, and I can't stress this enough. It's quick fire. Yeah. Okay. If you say well fire at the beginning of your sentence, you have to walk out the door. Okay. Is there a world where Man United can challenge for the title next season?
I would be surprised.
Okay. What would be the one best player that they could sign, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be the number 6. So it depends what you want profile-wise for that number 6. But you mentioned Elliot Anderson. Sure, let's go with him.
also mentioned Baleba.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Baleba, but I think that Elliot Anderson's maybe a little bit more oven-ready, to use a phrase that Boris Johnson once used.
Not just once. I think he used it many, many times.
But yeah.
There were also lots of people were talking about not just in relation to Man United, but lots of other clubs. Sandro Tonali.
Yeah, I'm not convinced Sandro Tonali is what they need. But yeah, he is available for a lot of money. So sure, go for him.
Got it. Okay, and then a final quickfire question would be: what would be a good outcome next season, considering Carrick's appointment? What would be an acceptable outcome? And then I think we know what would be bad based on those two things.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because